What's up, everybody? If you are buying a house here in Maryland, please, I am begging you, do not buy one of these. I mean, the last thing you want to do when you're buying a house here in Maryland is make a really expensive mistake. After 23 years in real estate, I have seen houses that I think to myself, there is no way somebody's going to buy this house. And then someone inevitably does, and I honestly wonder if they regret it. I bet they do. So today, I'm going to share with you the homes that I really think you should never buy and how to avoid making a big mistake that could really cost you. And stay till the end because my last one, it might surprise you. So let's dive right in. First up are flipped houses. Look, I get it. They're gorgeous. Shiny new kitchens, sparkling bathrooms, fresh paint. But here's the truth. Most investors are focused on flipping fast and cheap. This means they often cut corners, sometimes patching, plumbing, electrical work, or covering crack and mold with drywall. I've seen so many buyers fall in love with the pretty finishes and they forget to look underneath the surface. And remember, flipped houses usually come with a higher price tag because you're actually paying for those renovations. So if the work wasn't done right, you could be overpaying big time. I feel the same way about model homes and new construction developments. The builder wants to make that model home as fast as possible, knowing the people won't be living in it while they're selling the rest of the lots. Do you really think they take the time to make sure all the workmanship is really at the highest level? Maybe, but I'm skeptical. So if you are thinking about buying a flip home or a model home, do your homework, get a thorough inspection, bring a structural engineer, and make sure everything is done by the book. If everything checks out, awesome, you've got a move-in ready home. But if not, you might be signing up for more trouble than it's worth. The next house you should never, ever buy is a house with a mold problem. Here in Maryland, we have super humid springs and summers, so mold can easily grow if you're not diligent. Some mold is easy to see. You see those brown or black spots in the ceiling of the shower or under the sink or in the unfinished room in the basement. But other times, the only clue is a musty smell. I had a client once who's buying this $1.3 million house here in Bethesda, Maryland. He loved this house, but it smelled super musty. Now, granted, the sellers had moved out and houses can smell musty if nobody's been in and out of the house for a while. But during the inspection, the inspector put a moisture meter up to one of the walls in the powder room and it went crazy. There was no access to get to that part of the wall in the bathroom unless we drilled a hole in the drywall, which you can't do during an inspection. And there was no visible mold on the wall, but it had been just recently painted. But it was obvious there was a moisture problem. The inspector advised my client to do a proper mold test to confirm if there was actually mold behind the wall. We did. We asked the seller, and the seller said no. They wouldn't let us have the time to do the test because these tests take time to get to the lab and get the results back. This to me was a huge red flag. My client chose to cancel the contract, and I have to say, I was really relieved. Mold can be really scary. It can cause a lot of health problems, depending on what kind of mold it actually is. I don't know who ended up buying that house because it did sell, but I really hope they ended up ripping down that wall and remediating any mold that they found there. The next house I would never buy is a house with a septic system that has not been properly inspected. You might not realize it, but there are many parts of Maryland, here in Potomac, Olney, Laytonsville, Poolesville, and a lot of other places where the homes aren't always on public sewer. Instead, they rely on a private septic system. But here's the thing, septic repairs, they're no joke. If a system fails, you're looking at thousands or tens of thousands of dollars for replacement. And unfortunately, I've seen many situations where buyers, they don't listen to their agents and they've waived inspections to make their offer stronger and it backfired. In this one case, buyers fell in love with this beautiful, beautiful farmhouse. Against the agent's recommendations, they waived the septic inspection, hoping to beat out the other offers. A few months after closing, they discovered soggy patches in the yard. And sure enough, the septic system was failing. They ended up spending over $25,000 in repairs. So here's my advice. Always check if a property is on public sewer or septic. If it is septic, get a specialized septic inspection. A general inspection won't cover it. And ask the seller for any records of maintenance, pumping, and any upgrades or permits. A septic tank should be pumped every 2 to 3 years. You want to know exactly what you're buying into because trust me, septic surprises, they're not fun. The next house I would never buy is a house with unpermitted additions or renovations. This comes up more often than you think. Someone adds a sunroom or finishes a basement, builds a deck, or even adds a bathroom and a bedroom without getting the proper permits from the county. On the surface, the house might look amazing, but here's the problem. When you go to sell the house, unpermitted work can cause a nightmare. You might have trouble passing inspection. Buyers might hesitate, and in some cases, you might be forced to tear down the work or pay hefty fines to bring everything up to code. I've seen buyers fall in love with these big additions, only to find out the renovations weren't permitted or inspected. Suddenly, their home's square footage or that extra bedroom doesn't actually count when they go to resell. So here's my advice. Always check the county or city's permit records if you see a big addition. Ask the seller for documentation and make sure your agent helps you verify it. Buying a home is really exciting, but you don't want to inherit someone else's shortcut. Trust me, the risk is not worth it. The next house I would never, ever buy is a house where an oil tank is buried underground. We have this here in Maryland, especially in homes that were built between 1900 and 1985. The seller is obligated to disclose if there is an oil tank buried on their property and must remove it or abandon it. If you are planning on buying a house where there is an oil tank buried and it has been abandoned but not removed, I would strongly recommend asking the seller to remove it before you close on the house. Once that tank is removed, make sure you test the soil because contaminated soil is no joke. Leaking oil can cause respiratory problems if it released volatile organic compounds or VOCs into the air. Liver and kidney damage if the oil leaked into the groundwater, contaminating drinking water supplies, and possible increased cancer risk. It's just not worth it. And if the seller won't remove the abandoned tank, I would just not buy the house. But if you are determined to buy it, please at least contact your insurance company before you write the contract to see if they will require you to remove the tank before they will insure the house. Because removing the tank can be very expensive, especially if you do it right and you test the soil afterwards. The cost can range from like $1,500 to $3,000 for a basic removal with no leaks or contamination to $10,000 to $50,000 or more if the soil is contaminated and needs extensive remediation. To be honest, even if the tank was removed, I still would hesitate to buy the house. There are just too many unknowns that a leaky tank could cause, and it's just not worth it to me. The next house I would never buy is one that's in a flood zone. You might be surprised, but here in Maryland, right outside of DC, we have a lot of neighborhoods that are actually in designated flood zones. I had clients who bought a beautiful brand new home in Kensington that backed to a creek and was classified as a flood zone. Their home insurance was going to be way higher than it normally would have been if they had to buy flood insurance. Luckily, in this case, the builder had already started the FEMA reclassification process, and we wrote the contract contingent upon that change. In this case, we won. But without that, they would have been stuck with this huge insurance premium every month. And besides a huge insurance premium, living in a flood zone has other problems. You might have a higher risk of mold and mildew, property damage from flooding, as well as a lower resale value, as these homes can be harder to sell. It's just too risky, and who needs all that worry about possible flooding, damage, and resale problems? Just don't buy it. Okay, so this next one is a little bit controversial, but personally, I would never buy a house that backs to power lines. We have a lot of neighborhoods here in Maryland that back to power lines, so this does come up quite often. So far, science has been unable to substantiate health risks from exposure to power lines, especially if the house is at least 200 feet from high electromagnetic fields or EMFs. This is all relative, so please do your own due diligence if you are thinking about buying a house that backs to power lines. That being said, even if the actual risk is really low, the perceived health risk by potential buyers can affect the property's value. I mean, all you have to do is Google it, and the headlines can be really scary. I mean, try it yourself. You'll see like cancer. So like I said, even though it hasn't been substantiated, the perceived risk can affect the value. Now, to be fair, there are some people that love having those power lines in their backyard. They're assured there are no neighbors behind them. It's really quiet and they enjoy the privacy. But when they go to sell, it can be a huge problem. It's the unknown that taints the house and can affect its resale value. So it's a no for me, but the thought of having no neighbors behind me does sound kind of nice. And while we're talking about location, I would also never buy a home that backs to the highway. We have both 495, the Beltway, and 270 here in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is right outside of DC. So in order to live close to DC, you may have to compromise on this one. But given the choice, I would never buy one of those houses. Besides the noise, pollution, and the overall ugliness of having a highway in your backyard, the resale value will be immediately compromised. Even in a highly competitive market, homes that back to the highway are still harder to sell. Now, would I buy a house a few streets away from the highway? Yes, I would. Like I said, sometimes you can't help but be near a highway if you want a specific neighborhood due to schools or you want to be close to DC. But I would never buy a home that actually backs to the highway. That is a hard pass for me. Okay, we just have a couple more. The next house I would never buy is the fanciest, most expensive, nicest house in the neighborhood. And here's why. First off, there's a ceiling on how much that house can appreciate, especially if the rest of the neighborhood isn't keeping up. If the homes around you are less expensive and not as well maintained, it can drag down the value of your house no matter how amazing it is. And then there's the resale issue. When it comes time to sell, if your house is more expensive than other houses in the neighborhood, you might struggle to find buyers who want to pay that extra cash. They'll be looking at your house and thinking, why should I pay so much more when I can find a similar house in the same neighborhood for less money? Plus, let's say you want to do some upgrades. Maybe upgrade your nice kitchen to even fancier kitchen or do some big splashy backyard thing. You're likely not going to get that money back because the surrounding homes will kind of cap out how much value you can actually add. It's what they call over improvement, and it's a real thing. And here's another thing. If your house is that much nicer than the rest of the houses in the neighborhood, you might feel a little out of place with your neighbors. It can just feel a little awkward when your house is the standout house, and not necessarily in a good way. You might not vibe with your neighbors as much, and it can affect your quality of life while living there. So, bottom line, it's better to pick a really nice house in a great neighborhood where there's room to grow in value rather than going all out on the best house in the neighborhood that might not give you the best return in the long run. Okay, one more and then we'll finish with my last one. And by the way, if this video is giving you some value, do me a favor, hit the like button, comment below, subscribe to our channel. It just motivates us to make more videos. Okay, the next house I would never buy is a house in an HOA. Now, I know this one is personal. Some people love them and other people don't. But I've seen so many clients regret buying a house in an HOA when they didn't fully understand the rules, the fees, and the politics. So if you are thinking about buying a house in an HOA, make sure you understand all the rules as well as the vibe. I've done a few videos about true stories about living in an HOA and what possible nightmare situations can occur. So do me a favor, if you are going to move into a house in an HOA, take a couple minutes and watch some of those videos so you know what to look out for and how to protect yourself. And lastly, I would never buy a house with major drainage or grading problems. Maryland's rolling landscapes, older neighborhoods, and sometimes tricky clay-heavy soil can cause serious drainage issues around homes. Here's what I've seen. Yards that slope towards the house instead of away, funneling water right to the foundation. Homes with no gutters or poor downspout placements, causing water to pool near those basement walls. Low-lying lots or houses at the bottom of the hill, constantly battling runoff water or standing water. One time, I showed a beautiful home to a buyer. Everything looked perfect on the inside. But when we walked around the back, I noticed deep water channels carved into the lawn. Sure enough, after heavy rain, water poured straight down right into the basement windows. Fixing bad graining or drainage isn't just a weekend landscaping project. It can be really expensive to regrade or install French drains or adding full basement waterproofing systems. So my advice, always walk the exterior and see how water would move around the house. Look for signs of erosion or standing water or basement water stains. And of course, bring in a qualified inspector. If you're unsure, water problems can wreck your investment and are super expensive to fix. A gorgeous home isn't so gorgeous when you're bailing out the basement every time it rains. So there you have it. These are the homes that I would never buy here in Maryland. One thing we didn't really talk about, except for the model home that I would never buy, is new construction. So if you are thinking about new constructions, there are reasons I would never buy one. So check out this video next. Thanks for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!